Hello and welcome everybody to another puzzle challenge video from ChessUniversity.com. This is Ryan Murphy, and I hope you guys are still having a great week. This is our second intermediate puzzle of the week and our last one. So tomorrow we'll be moving into the harder puzzles as we go into the weekend around the world. But this one is our last one for the under 1500 crowd. Though of course anyone else is welcome to chime in and try to post the solution both in the YouTube comments and on the website. So, as usual, I'll be putting the link in the description so you guys can see the official post where you can submit your answers for rewards points on the website. Today it's another black to play and find the best move. And this is a position where it's not like completely winning, but it's definitely black has some advantage if they find the best move, and otherwise it's rather balanced. So this game comes to us from the Boardwalk Pearson IM tournament played earlier in 2020. This one was played between a 2200 and 2300 level player. 2300 had the black pieces. So let's jump back through the opening and see how we got to this position. Began with c4, and we had a kind of a ready setup from white, where white ended up opting for double fianchetto, and black just went for like a King's Indian sort of setup. So the opening's rather quiet, not very much confrontation in the center. c6 is kind of an unusual move, in some sense, but in another way it's sort of aimed against the bishop coming to this diagonal, trying to blunt the diagonal in advance. But not the most obvious move for black's setup. You might expect here black to go for either d5 directly, which leads to different types of positions, or even like d6, e5 is another one. But c6 was played, bishop g2, d6 now was played, so that this bishop on c8 can develop, castles, and e5, black puts a pawn in the center, and black's got an okay position here. Again, neither side's really doing anything overly aggressive so far. So d3, knight on b to d7, knight on b to d2, and rook e8, putting the rook in the center, and keeping an eye on the idea of at some point maybe playing e4 down the road. Queen to c2, queen gets out of the way so the white rooks are connected. Black still has to figure out what to do with the bishop on c8. And black plays what is a pretty typical idea, actually. Because the bishop on c8 is going to take several moves to get out, knight's got to move first, then the bishop has to move, and then the queen still has to move before the rooks are connected. Black goes for a secondary way of trying to activate the queenside rook on a8, which is to play a5. And this is a good one to take note of, because in a lot of positions, not all the time, but a lot of times when your opponent has this structure, you can use this b3 pawn as a hook to try to open up the a file for the rook and activate it without having to move it off the a file. Mostly you'll see this on the queen side. It's a bit riskier to do this on the king side, and because of the fact that you usually have to castle early in the opening. So white goes a3, and the point now is that if black were to play a4, white would respond with a b3 to b4. So this would no longer make much sense because it wouldn't open up any lines for the rook, and it would just help white consolidate a space advantage here. So a3, kind of a prophylactic move. Here queen e7 was played, getting the queen developed. Rook a to c1, and here black starts to go for an idea which you'll sometimes see in the actual King's Indian, where white gets the big center with the pawns on e4, d4, and c4, and then it gets locked up because the d4 pawn eventually ends up on d5. In that structure, with the center being closed, black has this very standard, well-known idea of moving the knight and playing for f5 and trying to both put pressure on the center and also continue pushing for an attack. But this is a very different type of position. First off, because the center is not closed at all, the center is wide open. There's no locked position of the pawns, and also white has a kingside fianchetto here, so it's not as easy to attack as the standard position from a lot of the King's Indians. So knight h5, I guess the intention was to play f5 because that's exactly what happened on the next move. But it feels a bit loose here. The fact that this diagonal is sort of super exposed because the pawns aren't locked on light squares seems like this shouldn't be as good as it normally is. And I think white reacted in a nice way with e4. So basically challenging this pawn right away. Trying to slow down the attack. And black reacted with a takes b4, a takes b4, and c5. Here white took on f5, gf, because you guys might be asking this in the comments. I mean, what else can you do? The rook is here. When they take this pawn, there's really nothing else you can do that's aggressive, so they have to take. So that's why there's really nothing to consider in terms of alternatives here. So BC not too sure is a good move because it helps this knight develop to c5. So here probably white could have done better. A move that the computer really likes. I mean, there's a lot of moves the computer likes. It generally thinks white's got a very good position here, but kind of a simple move, which makes a lot of sense, is just bishop c3 because it keeps the tension basically between these two pawns. And so now if white takes, then the bishop will recapture. Knight c5 can still be played, but at least the bishop is now aligned with the queen on e7, so it's more active than the game. And another move which is pretty interesting and probably good for white is just to put the rook on the open file. So putting the rook here is also not bad. Lining again, keeping an eye on the queen from a distance. It's usually not a bad idea to line up your pieces with your opponent's queen. All right, so bc5, not the best, but also not terrible. But it does help the knight get into the game. And now d4, trying to blast open the center. If there was a rook already on e1, this would be even more powerful because of the pin. So anyway, d4 here. Knight to a4, applying pressure to the bishop. Now rook a1 was played. This creates a pin. So now that the knight tries to move, the rook on a1 will attack the rook on a8. Bishop d7, connecting the rooks, defending the knight again. So the knight's no longer hanging. And now c5. And yeah, here's where it starts to get tactically messy, and we eventually get to our position where black has a nice tactical move. c5 kind of is blowing open the position, but not in a way that's favorable for white, because black has this nice move e4 with tempo against the knight. And in general, the queen side has opened. Yeah, this is good because it looks like a lot of white pieces are over on the queen side, but the resulting position, there's this weak pawn on d4 now. So plus white allowed the pawn to e4. So these are two things that kind of favor black. So here white's got to be a little bit careful. Knight e5 was played. Rook e to c8, hitting the queen. Queen to b3 check. This is sort of like the downside generally of playing f5 in the position where the diagonal isn't closed. This is a very dangerous diagonal that black needs to keep control of. So it's paramount here to play bishop e6 to cover the diagonal. And now after bishop a3, we reach our key position. So here, once again, it's black to play and find the best move. What would you guys do? Please feel free to share in the comments here and on chessuniversity.com, and I'll see you guys tomorrow for the next puzzle video. Thanks.